What if the marriages that really last, the ones that feel deeply connected, aren't just about a legal paper or even liking the same things? What if there's something, well, much deeper, a kind of connection that maybe even changes who you are? Today, we're doing a real deep dive into that idea. We're looking at the crucial difference between what most of us think of as a contract marriage and this much bigger concept, covenant marriage. And this isn't just about word games, about definitions. It's really exploring the very nature of these unions. What does it mean to chase after this idea of relational oneness?
Exactly. And guiding us through this pretty complex landscape is Nakati John. We're leaning heavily on his insights today. His recent book, Defining Marriage, sketching a difference between covenant and contract, gives us this really unique perspective. It comes from his, well, extensive study of marriage, looking across church history and different cultures too.
Right. So our goal here, our mission in this deep dive, is to unpack Nakati John's core ideas. We want to help you really get the essence of covenant marriage. Why is it so different? And what does it actually mean to pursue that kind of oneness, which, well, for many people, reflects a kind of divine commitment? Okay, so let's jump in. Let's unpack that core distinction first. Most of us, I think, when we hear marriage, our minds go straight to, well, a legal contract, right? An agreement, terms, conditions.
hmm That's the common understanding. And what's really fascinating is how Nakati John kind of frames this. Based on his studies, he points out that a contract marriage is often fundamentally seen as a partnership, or maybe even a performance-based service.
Performance-based. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean practically?
Well, think about it. It's built on agreements, right?
Yes.
Specific legal obligations, rights that are often conditional. If you do this, then I'll do that kind of thing. It's something society witnesses, often
Mm.
with, specific terms laid out. And if one person doesn't hold up their end, well, there are usually ways out or consequences built in.
Okay, I see. So it's conditional, based on performance. And that sounds very different from what he calls covenant marriage. How does that contrast?
Nakati John argues that covenant marriage is, well, it's a profoundly different beast. It's about relational oneness,
Hmm.
and it specifically seeks to reflect God's own covenant with people. So it shifts the focus. It's less about what you do for each other, the tasks and roles,
Uh-huh.
and much more about who you become together in that relationship. It's founded on unconditional promises, a spirit of sacrifice,
Yeah.
and this deep sense of a divine presence right there in the marriage. His book, Defining Marriage, really lays out this difference. It moves way beyond just a transaction. It's about transformation.
Wow. Okay. That's a really significant shift. So if it's not mainly about performance, like you said, what does that actually look like for a couple, day to day? How did that change how you'd even define success in a marriage or failure?
Oh, it changes everything. Because in a covenant view, success isn't just did we meet the terms? It's about are we growing together into this deeper oneness? And failure.
Hmm.
Well, it's not necessarily a breach of contract that ends things. It's seen more as a challenge, an opportunity to actually deepen the commitment to understand each other better. It mirrors, in a way, a God who sticks with his promises.
And Nakati John doesn't just pull this idea out of thin air, right? You mentioned he traces it back. Where does he start?
Yes, he traces it way back, right back to creation itself, actually. He highlights two really foundational concepts that establish this unique kind of bond. The first one is huge. The idea that marriage reflects the divine human relationship. Nakati John puts it this way, and I find this really powerful. The divine human relationship conveys oneness in which God, as a sacrificial lover, pursues a bond with his beloved people. He points to scriptures like Exodus 19, where God calls Israel his treasured possession if they obey his covenant. But it's not just about obedience as a task. It implies this expectation of real relational unity, acceptance, knowing each other intimately, dwelling together, oneness. God wants connection, not just compliance.
So marriage is meant to be a reflection of that kind of relationship, that intense pursuing love from God. What's the second concept that flows from that?
The second is that within that divine human relationship, people gain a new identity. Think about it. God calls them his treasured possession, a holy nation. And in the New Testament context, believers in Christ get a totally new identity. 2 Corinthians 5.17, a new creation, the old is gone, the new has come. So Nakati John emphasizes that covenant marriage works similarly. It fundamentally changes your identity. You shift from being an individual, maybe protecting your own space or role, to becoming a spouse who is ready to serve the other sacrificially. That kind of deep engagement, it changes everything about how spouses interact. It literally changes who you are. It's that radical me to we shift.
Wow. So it's not just two lives joining, it's, like you said, a transformation. How does Nakati John actually define covenant marriage? What's the definition he lands on?
His definition of covenant marriage essentially portrays a sacred unity between one man and one woman, established in God's presence. And he ties this definition right back to Genesis 1, where both the man and the woman are created in God's image. That means they're spiritual beings, relational beings, and fundamentally designed for unity. They're joined together for a shared purpose, reflecting that image. It suggests a divine blueprint for this specific kind of relationship.
A divine blueprint. So we're kind of fit for oneness from the start, designed for it. How does he use that creation story to really build this case for unity?
Indeed, fit for oneness. He looks closely at Genesis 2, where God takes the initiative, creating Eve as a helper fit for Adam. And Adam's reaction, that famous line, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." McCarty Johnson points out this isn't just Adam being happy to have company. He sees these as covenant-forming words. That phrase, bone of my bones, it's not just physical similarity. It speaks to this incredibly deep connection and inherent commitment. It sets up the husband's role as a sacrificial lover, fostering this lover-beloved identity that's about mutual presence, not just, a functional partnership. It's a soul connection.
And what about that phrase we hear all the time, leave and cleave? How does that play into this covenant idea?
That's about initiating this God-designed bond. It involves a public act leaving behind former primary loyalties. Establishing the marriage is the new priority. Cleaving means sticking together, uniting. And that phrase, becoming one flesh, that's absolutely crucial. Nakati John stresses this isn't just about the wedding day or even just physical intimacy. He sees it as an ongoing process, a journey towards greater transparency, deeper intimacy, vulnerability. It's about continually growing in knowing the other person and being known yourself without shame. It's a lifelong deepening of that unity.
A lifelong process, not a one-time event. That really does sound different from just signing a contract.
Completely different. And building on that foundation, this idea of covenant identity emerges. It shapes how you understand what it means to be a spouse. It's about seeing your spouse as someone you're called to love unconditionally, sacrificially, within this exclusive, deeply valued relationship. Crucially, each spouse unilaterally desires the marriage towards oneness. The commitment comes from within. It's a proactive choice, not just a reaction to the other person or external rules. So this covenant identity truly reflects that dynamic, the sacrificial lover toward his exclusive beloved. It's mirroring that divine pattern again.
That level of commitment, it feels like it goes way beyond what most people probably think of when they think about marriage. It's almost, spiritual calling.
It absolutely is framed that way. In defining marriage, Nakati John constantly draws these parallels. He looks at passages like Malachi 2. There, God himself is described as the witness to the marriage covenant, which means, breaking that covenant isn't just a personal matter. It has spiritual weight, spiritual consequences. The text even asks, did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? That's a profound question about God's involvement, right?
Yeah. It implies God isn't just watching from the sidelines. He's somehow involved in the very joining, the spiritual fabric of it. So how does that change things when a couple hits rough patches compared to just a secular agreement?
Well, it changes the stakes, doesn't it? If God is a witness, even a participant, it elevates the whole thing. It means conflict isn't just about navigating disagreements between two people. There's this sense of accountability to the sacred bond itself, to that divine presence. So the motivation for reconciliation might shift from just making things work to honoring the sacred commitment they've entered into before God. It moves beyond my rights versus your rights.
And this idea carries through into the New Testament, too, with some pretty powerful imagery.
Exactly. Think about Christ being called the bridegroom and the church his bride. That metaphor runs through Ephesians 5, John 3, and echoes Old Testament prophets like Hosea and Isaiah. This isn't just a nice picture. It highlights Christ's sacrificial love for the church. That becomes the ultimate model, the blueprint, especially for how a husband should love his wife.
Right. The husband as the sacrificial lover echoing Christ. That sounds like an incredibly high bar.
And Nakati John is clear. It's not something people can just muscle through on their own strength. He argues it calls the husband to lead with that selfless, initiating kind of love, and it calls the wife to respond with honorable respect. But the key is both spouses are choosing the other's interests over their own. And critically, they have to rely on God's Spirit to even make that possible. It's often countercultural, counterintuitive. This whole covenant identity fosters that Christian identity, a sacrificial lover united with an exclusive beloved.
Yeah.
It's about dwelling together, pursuing deeper connection constantly, and leaning on God for the strength to do it.
That's a really compelling framework.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try and bring it all together. To really get a solid grasp, what are the defining characteristics of this covenant marriage as Nakati John outlines them? Can we break those down?
Yeah, let's summarize. Based on Nakati John's work in defining marriage, a few key characteristics really stand out. They paint the picture. First, and maybe most importantly, it's a sacred unity established in God's presence. It's not just two people deciding to be together. The bond itself is seen as divinely created, divinely sanctioned. That makes it way more significant than just a human agreement. Remember, Matthew 19.6, God doesn't just witness, he joins them. They're united by God.
What about exclusivity? That seems pretty central today.
Absolutely central. A covenant marriage is defined as an exclusive bond between one man and one woman, period. It's inherently monogamous. The relationship prioritizes and values the spouse above all others. This exclusivity creates that safe, secure space needed for true one-flesh intimacy, and that means physical, emotional, and spiritual intimacy. Nakati John is quite firm on this point. Any relationship that deviates from this exclusivity or from permanence, well, in his framework, it can't really be called a covenant marriage. It requires that singular focus.
Okay, and you mentioned permanence, so that's not just a hopeful wish, it's baked into the definition.
Critically so, yes. Covenant marriage is understood as an unalterable and permanent commitment until death. Full stop. Nakati John points out, God never cancels the covenant promises he has made. Now, obviously, human brokenness, things like disobedience or what the Bible calls a hardened heart, can sadly lead to the breakdown of the relationship's functioning. Divorce happens. But the bond itself, from this theological perspective, remains sacred and is intended by God to be permanent until death separates the couple. It's about that unilateral desire for oneness we talked about, that persistent choice to pursue the relationship even when it's hard. That's what allows trust and patience to grow over a lifetime. It enables that ongoing becoming one flesh.
Wow. We've certainly taken a deep dive today into Nakati John's work, especially from his book, Defining Marriage. That distinction between contract and covenant, it's really stark. It's clear that covenant marriage, as he lays it out, isn't just putting a different label on things. It's a whole different way of understanding human connection,
Yeah.
deeply tied to a divine relationship and this idea of transforming who you are.
Absolutely. This whole concept, marriage is a sacred unity reflecting God's own covenant nature, pushing us towards that Christian identity of a sacrificial lover with an exclusive beloved mode. And it really does shift how you might view commitment, intimacy, everything. It moves way beyond just, fulfilling obligations or performance. It aims for this profound relational oneness where self-interest kind of takes a backseat to mutual devotion and maybe even a divine purpose.